The first rule of working for Vivian Hale was simple: never forget who she was. The second rule, the one nobody said out loud, but everyone understood, was never let her forget who you were either. Because Vivian Hale had a specific talent for reducing people to their function. You were her CFO, her legal team, her head of security. You were the role. The person inside the role was a courtesy she extended selectively and withdrew without warning. My name is Declan Marsh. I'm 36 years old, and for the past 2 years, I've been Director of Strategic Operations for Hale Meridian, one of the fastest-growing tech infrastructure firms on the East Coast. Before that, I was an Army intelligence officer who came home from a third deployment to find that the woman I'd planned to marry had made different plans. The career I'd imagined was available to me had restructured itself out of existence, and that the version of me that had existed before 3 years overseas was not coming back. I rebuilt. That's what I do. I'm very good at rebuilding inside structures someone else designed. The problem is that I am less good at building anything of my own, anything soft, anything personal, anything that requires me to stay somewhere long enough to be known. I don't trust easily. I trust data, protocols, outcomes. People are too variable. I had learned that lesson in a way that doesn't let you unlearn it. I had been managing Vivian Hale for 2 years, and I had liked her in the same way I liked a complicated problem, at a careful professional distance, with deep respect for how well-constructed she was, and no interest in what was underneath the construction. I want to be honest about that, because what happened at the Meridian Retreat in the Hamptons was not something I had planned or wanted. It was something that happened in the gap between who I had been managing myself to be and what I actually was underneath that management. The annual executive retreat was held at a private estate in Southampton the second weekend of September. 8 executives, a dozen support staff, 2 days of strategy sessions dressed up as leisure. I had been before. I knew the format: collaborative by day, performative by evening, everyone slightly too conscious of hierarchy to fully relax. I arrived Friday evening, unpacked, ran 4 miles on the beach to get the travel out of my system. Saturday morning, I was up at 6, out of habit, and I took my coffee to the pool terrace because it faced east, and I had learned, in a lot of different contexts, to watch the sunrise when it was available. She was already there. Vivian Hale, my CEO, the woman who ran quarterly earnings calls with the composed precision of someone conducting an orchestra and boardroom conflicts with the strategic patience of someone who had already seen the end game 3 moves back. She was sitting at the edge of the pool with her feet in the water, a coffee cup beside her, her hair loose in a way I had never once seen it in 2 years of working together. She was wearing a linen shirt over a swimsuit, and she was reading something on her phone, and she looked like a person. Not a CEO, not a function. A person sitting in the early morning with wet feet and loose hair, with the particular unguarded quality that people have when they believe no one is watching. I stopped walking. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the light to shift. Long enough for something in me to do something I had not authorized. Then she looked up. The way she looked at me. It wasn't embarrassment, wasn't the performance of being caught. It was just direct. The full force of her attention, which anyone at Hale Meridian could tell you felt like stepping into a searchlight. Her eyes were green and very still. "Marsh," she said. "Ms. Hale." I moved forward because standing frozen on a pool terrace was not a presentation I was willing to maintain. I didn't know anyone was up. I'm always up at 6. So am I. A pause. The pool surface moving in the light. The Atlantic somewhere behind the dunes. "What are you staring at?" she said. The direct question I didn't have a direct answer for. I chose honesty over deflection because she had a specific ability to identify deflection immediately and respond to it with a silence more uncomfortable than any question. "I didn't recognize you for a second," I said. "With your hair down." She looked at me for a moment. Then, instead of the cooler temperature response I had prepared for, she said, "Sit down, Marsh. The coffee here is actually good." Set. We drank coffee in the early morning light, and she asked me about the Henderson infrastructure proposal I'd been building for 6 weeks. And we talked about it with the ease of 2 people who are good at the same things. And the conversation moved the way good conversation moves. Faster than you plan, further than you expect. At 7:15, she said, "Can I tell you something off the record?" "Yes. I hate this retreat." She looked at the pool. I invented it 4 years ago because a management consultant told me shared leisure time built executive cohesion. I've been dreading it annually ever since. A pause. I come out here at 6 because it's the only 2 hours where it actually feels like mine. I looked at her, this woman who had built a $2 billion firm, who commanded rooms by walking into them, who I had watched operate for 2 years with the precision of someone who had learned to keep all of herself exactly where she intended. Then why does anyone get to take it from you? I said. She turned and looked at me. The searchlight quality of her gaze, but softer now, or maybe I was only noticing the softness because I was seeing her without the professional surface for the first time. That, she said quietly, is the right question. She stood, picked up her coffee, and looked at me with an expression I didn't have a category for. The Henderson proposal, she said. I want your full read this afternoon. Not the version you prepared for the room. Your actual read. You'll have it. She nodded once and walked inside. I sat by the pool in the September morning and felt the specific, inconvenient truth of a man who has just discovered that the professional distance he's been maintaining has been doing considerable structural work, and that work has now been compromised. The afternoon session ran long. I gave her the Raoul Henderson read, the version with the risk architecture I'd been softening for the board presentation, the 3 scenarios I actually believed in, the one outcome I thought was most likely and why. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without performance of listening. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Why didn't you show me this version 6 weeks ago? She said. Because 6 weeks ago, I wasn't sure you wanted it. And now I think you've been getting managed versions of everything for long enough that you can tell the difference. A silence in the conference room. The other executives suddenly very interested in their laptops. She looked at me with something that was almost a smile and was more dangerous than a smile. Everyone take a break, she said. Marsh, stay. When the room cleared, she said, I want you running point on Henderson directly. No committee. Report to me. Understood. And Marsh. She looked at me with the directness she used when she was saying the real thing. The version of you that existed before this morning. The one who gave me managed answers. I don't need him anymore. I held her gaze. I'll need that in writing. This time she actually smiled. Brief, real, the version that didn't seem to have a performance layer. I left the conference room and stood in the corridor and did the thing I'd been trained not to do, which was allow a feeling to run past its first moment without containment. I let it run. That night at dinner, I noticed him for the first time. He arrived late. Sebastian Crane, the new board member Vivian had installed 3 months ago over quiet objections from 3 of the legacy executives. He was 41, London educated, the kind of handsome that came with the specific effortlessness of someone who had never had to work for a room. He sat beside Vivian, and she greeted him with the warmth of old familiarity, and they talked in the low, private register of people who have a history that predates the current context. He looked at me once across the table, measured, unhurried, the look of a man who has already assessed and filed you. After dinner, on the terrace, he came to stand beside me at the railing. You're Marsh, he said. I am. Vivian speaks highly of you. He swirled his glass. She's not generous with that. I know. He looked at the dark Atlantic. How long had you been in love with her? The question landed like a precision strike. I didn't show it. Years of intelligence work teaches you to receive unexpected information without your face going somewhere you haven't sent it. I work for her, I said. He smiled, not unkindly. That wasn't the question. He finished his drink. I asked because I care about her, and because the men who fall for Vivian without understanding what she's carrying tend to make things considerably worse for everyone. A pause, including themselves. He went inside. I stood at the railing in the September dark and felt the specific weight of a warning that was also a confession. He loved her too, and somewhere inside that realization was the second thing, the thing that changed the shape of everything that would follow. He wasn't just a board member with a past. The way he'd said what she's carrying, it wasn't the language of old affection. It was the language of current knowledge, of someone who knew something about Vivian Hale that she hadn't told me, something she was afraid of. I didn't sleep that night. Henderson went live 6 weeks after the retreat, and it changed things between Vivian and me in the way that shared high-stakes work always changes things. It strips away the formality because there isn't time for it, and what's left is the actual people. We were in the office past midnight 4 nights a week. She drank her coffee black, never ate before noon, and had a habit, when she was thinking through a problem, of taking off her watch and setting it face down on the desk, as though she was removing time from the equation entirely. I started noticing the watch as a signal. Watch off meant she was in the part of the problem that mattered. I started noticing everything. That was the problem. The way she tilted her head when she was deciding whether a risk was worth taking. The specific quiet that preceded her best ideas. The version of her that appeared at 11 p.m. when the professional surface had been worn down by the day. The version with loose sentences and real laughter. The version that was present without management. Yeah, I trust you more than I trust anyone in this company. A pause. That's not a professional statement. I want you to know it isn't. The room. The late hour. The distance between us that had been narrowing for weeks and was narrowing now. Vivian, don't manage it, she said. Just hold it. You don't have to do anything with it right now. I held it, the way she'd asked, without doing anything with it. And that moment of not moving, of just letting something exist without containing it, was the most intimate thing that had happened to me in 3 years. Sebastian Crane moved his offices to the Hale Meridian floor 3 weeks later. The official reason was oversight efficiency. As a board member with increasing operational involvement, proximity made logistical sense. The real reason was something I couldn't name yet, but could feel the way you feel a structural instability before you can see it. He and Vivian had lunches I wasn't invited to. Conversations that ended when I walked into rooms, not guiltily, but with the specific privacy of people managing information. He was always correct with me, always warm, even the kind of warm that is comprehensive enough to be its own form of information management. But I watch him watch her. He watched Vivian the way a man watches something he has decided he still has a claim to, and the watching had an impatience in it that it took me 3 weeks to identify correctly. He wasn't waiting for her to choose him. He was waiting for something else. I found the document on a Thursday at 7 a.m. I had come in early to pull the final Henderson compliance filing and access the share drive from a terminal that auto-populated a recently accessed folder. Inside it, a legal correspondence thread I hadn't been part of between Vivian's personal attorney and a firm I didn't recognize. I was in the document for 10 seconds before I understood what I was reading. Vivian's late father, the man who had founded what would become Hale Meridian, had left the controlling shares of the original parent entity not to Vivian, but in a contested trust. The challenge to that trust had been filed 18 months ago by Sebastian Crane. He was contesting her father's estate, which meant he was contesting the legal foundation of her ownership of the company she had built. And he was doing it while sitting 40 feet from her office, eating lunch with her twice a week, smiling the smile of a man she trusted. I sat at the terminal and felt the specific cold of understanding arriving too late and not late enough. I picked up my phone to call her. It went to voicemail. I pulled up the building's security camera feed to find her, a habit from my intelligence days, the fastest way to locate someone in a controlled environment. The lobby camera, the parking level, the executive floor, her office empty, the terrace, Sebastian Crane on the terrace, Vivian facing him. Her body language, not the composed CEO version, something older and more raw than that. Whatever he was saying, she was hearing it for the first time. I could see in the way she was standing, the very still of a person absorbing something that is restructuring everything inside them. He reached out and put his hand on her arm. She didn't pull away. I closed the feed, set down my phone, and felt, in the space of 30 seconds, the full impact of what I had been doing. Falling for a woman who had a secret that predated me, inside a situation that was more dangerous than I'd understood, while a man who knew the whole picture had been managing his position with the patience of someone who had already decided how this ended. I had been the one without information in a room full of people who had it. 3 years of intelligence work, 2 years at her side, and I had still not seen it. She came to my office at noon. She closed the door. She stood with her back to it, and she looked at me with the expression of a woman who has just been through something and is deciding, in real time, whether to show it. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Vivian, let me say it." She pressed on. "Sebastian is contesting my father's estate. He claims my father promised him a controlling interest before the trust was written. He has letters, documents I've never seen. She paused, and he told me, 20 minutes ago, that if I don't agree to a private settlement, he'll take it to court, which means it becomes public, which means the company's ownership structure becomes a live question during the Henderson launch, I said. During the Henderson launch. She nodded. Her voice was controlled in the way that things are controlled when the effort of controlling them is immense, which he timed deliberately. The room between us. How long have you known about the contest? I said. A pause that told me everything. 18 months, she said. I held that. The 18 months of shared work, late nights, morning coffees. The 18 months of being the person she trusted more than anyone in the company. Why didn't you tell me? I said. She looked at me with the most honest, most unguarded expression she had ever turned toward me. Because telling you would have made it real, she said. And you were the one part of my life where it wasn't real yet. I stood up from my desk. She looked at me, waiting, reading, and I crossed the room and stood in front of her and I said, we're going to handle this. But I need you to tell me everything. From the beginning. Everything you know and everything you don't. A pause. No more managed versions. She looked at me, a long, complicated, searingly honest look. There's more, she said. Tell me. My father, she said, didn't just know Sebastian. He owed him. A debt that predates the company, predates the trust, predates everything I thought I knew about how Hale Meridian began. She stopped. And Sebastian has the proof. The floor tilting under everything I thought I understood. Then we need to know what the proof actually says, I said, before he gets to define it. She nodded. Her hand moved to mine, not dramatic, just present. Just the weight of it. Declan, she said. Yeah. Don't let me face this alone. You've been alone long enough, I said. That ends today. The filing hit the court docket on a Monday in November. Crane versus Hale Estate. Petition for reformation of testamentary trust and declaratory relief regarding corporate control. It was the legal equivalent of a controlled demolition, precisely placed, timed for maximum structural damage. Sebastian had filed on the first business day after the Henderson launch announcement, close enough to the announcement to ensure maximum press coverage, far enough to make an injunction against the filing legally complicated. By Tuesday morning, 3 of the firm's 5 largest institutional investors had called requesting briefings. By Wednesday, the story was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal's market section. By Thursday, Vivian's board was asking questions about stability of leadership that were phrased as concern and meant as something else. The law firm she chose was Alderman Cross, the kind of Manhattan litigation firm whose name alone communicated that the person who had hired them was not going to manage this quietly. Her lead attorney was a woman named Priya Alderman herself, 47, the specific sharp precision of someone who had spent 2 decades in high-stakes corporate litigation and had learned to treat panic as information and use it accordingly. Priya's first move was to ask me to reconstruct the company's founding history. Not the official version, the actual version, the financial provenance of Hale Meridian's initial capitalization, the ownership structure at inception, the nature of every relationship between Vivian's father, Gerard Hale, and Sebastian Crane. What I found over 10 days of forensic document work was this. Gerard Hale and Sebastian Crane had met in 1987 at an investment bank in London. They had, between 1989 and 1993, co-developed the technology framework that would eventually become the foundation of Hale Meridian. In 1993, Gerard Hale had used family capital to formally incorporate the company, and in doing so had structured the ownership in a way that cut Sebastian's contribution out of the record. The letters Sebastian had were real. The debt Gerard Hale owed was real. But the letters did not say what Sebastian was claiming they said. He was claiming Gerard had promised him a controlling stake as settlement of that debt. The letters showed a promise of equity, significant, legitimate equity that Sebastian had every right to claim, but not control. Not majority ownership. Not the thing that would put Vivian's position in genuine jeopardy. He was overstating the claim. Deliberately. Because the overstated version was the one that made headlines. The overstated version was the one that made investors nervous. The overstated version was the one that, even if it failed in court, achieved its actual purpose. destabilizing her enough to make a settlement look like the rational choice. It wasn't about winning. It was about pressure. I brought it to Vivian on a Thursday night, the documents laid out on her dining room table, the analysis I'd built over 10 days, the gap between what the letters actually said and what Sebastian was publicly claiming. She read it in silence. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "He knew," she said. "He knew my father owed him, and he waited until he could use it for the most damage. He waited until the company was worth something," I said, "and until you were in a position where the timing maximized the leverage." 23 years, she said. "He has been in my life for 23 years. He was at my father's funeral." She stopped. "He held my hand at my father's funeral, Declan." The room, the documents, the weight of a betrayal that had been patient enough to outlast a generation. I stayed with it. The specific discipline of not moving too fast toward the comfort she needed, giving the truth its full space first. "He made a mistake," I said. "He overstated the claim because the real claim wasn't enough for what he wanted. And that means in a courtroom, on the documents, he doesn't have what he needs." "Can you prove it?" "Priya can prove it," I said. "With what we have." Yes. The courtroom was in the Southern District of New York. It had the institutional grandeur of rooms designed to remind you that what happens inside the matters. The high ceilings, the American flags, the particular weight of 100 years of similar rooms where similar truths have been fought over with similar desperation. Vivian sat beside Priya at the defendant's table. She was wearing the dark navy she wore when she needed armor. I knew her wardrobe well enough to read it the way I read data. She was composed in the way she was composed when the effort of it was immense. She had not slept more than 4 hours a night in 3 weeks. I sat in the gallery, not at her table. That was the right call, legally and professionally. But she had asked me to be there, and I was there. Sebastian sat at the plaintiff's table and did not look at me. He looked only at Vivian, with the expression of a man who has convinced himself that what he is doing is just, and that the justness of it absolves the method. Priya's opening was 30 minutes of surgical precision. The actual language of the letters, the gap between the claim and the documentation, the timeline that showed Sebastian had made no legal challenge during the entire 15 years he'd had warm access to Vivian's life while the company grew into something worth contesting. Sebastian's attorney, a man named Vickers who moved through a courtroom like someone auditioning for a film he was certain he'd been cast in, presented the counter. The letters as promise, the equity as implicit control, the 15 years of silence as evidence of a gentleman's agreement rather than abandonment of claim. It was persuasive. It was not convincing. Not to the law, not to the documents. Then Vickers played his last card. "Your Honor," he said, "plaintiff would like to submit one additional exhibit. A sworn statement given by a former Hale Meridian executive, dated 3 days ago, attesting to a specific conversation with Ms. Hale in which she acknowledged the validity of Mr. Crane's ownership claim." The room. Priya stood. "Objection, late submission, foundation not established." The judge. "I'll hear the foundation, Mr. Vickers." Vickers named the executive. He named me. I heard my name and felt the floor tilt in the way it does when something has been done to you that you did not see coming, and a specific sick clarity of understanding who had done it and how. The statement had been fabricated. I had never given it. There was no conversation to attest to. But it had been notarized, submitted, and timed to land at the moment of maximum damage, when everything else had been resolved, and this was the variable that could still detonate the outcome. Vivian turned in her seat and looked at me. Not with accusation, with something that destroyed me more than accusation. The flicker of a woman who, for exactly 1 second, did not know whether to believe me. 1 second, she found her way back to me inside it. But I saw it, and Sebastian had known I would see it, and had designed it to land exactly there. Priya was on her feet, requesting a recess, marshaling her counter-strategy. The room was in procedural motion. And I sat in the gallery with the specific cold of a man who understood that the thing Sebastian had targeted was not Vivian's ownership of the company. It was her trust in me. Priya got the recess. 48 hours. We spent both of them building the disproof. The statement had been dated to a specific afternoon 3 weeks earlier. An afternoon, I had been in a client meeting in Washington with 12 witnesses and an airline ticket confirming I had not been in New York. The notary seal was real. The underlying attestation was not. We had the building security logs, the airline records, the meeting minutes. I gave the counter affidavit personally. Priya filed it at 9 a.m. on the second day. When the court reconvened, the fabricated statement was struck from the record. Vickers tried to recover. Priya did not let him. 2 hours later, the judge delivered a finding that the letters constituted a legitimate equity claim, real, compensable, and subject to appropriate settlement, but did not constitute evidence of a promise controlling stake. Sebastian Crane was entitled to the equity he had been owed since 1993, with appropriate interest and adjustment. He was not entitled to the company. He was not entitled to Vivian. When the gavel came down, Vivian sat for a long moment with her eyes closed. Then she opened them and turned to Priya and said something I couldn't hear. Then she turned and looked at me in the gallery. I stood up. She stood up. The room moving around us, attorneys and gallery, and the specific institutional noise of a proceeding resolving. We moved toward each other in the aisle, and when we reached each other, she said, "I saw your face when he named you." "I know," I said. "I want you to know that the doubt, it was 1 second. One." She held my gaze, and then it was gone. 1 second is real, I said. You don't have to pretend it wasn't there. No, she said, but I want you to know what ended it. She paused. Knowing you. 2 years of actually knowing you. 1 second of doubt, and 2 years of evidence on the other side. She looked at me steadily. Evidence wins. I held that. The mathematician's love language. The language of a woman who had built a company on evidence and was now applying it to the most important question in the room. He's going to appeal, I said. Let him. She picked up her coat. Walk out of this building with me. Sebastian Crane did not appeal. The calculation had always been leverage, not litigation, and when the leverage failed, the strategy had no second act. He accepted the equity settlement, substantial, legitimate, long overdue, and resigned from the Hale Meridian Board 6 weeks after the ruling. He sent Vivian a letter, which she showed me, that was 3 paragraphs long and more honest than anything he had said in a courtroom. He acknowledged the fabricated statement. He acknowledged the timing. He said he'd spent 23 years watching a debt become a wound, become a weapon, and that somewhere in that progression, he had lost the ability to distinguish between what he was owed and what he wanted. He said he had loved her father. He said he had loved her in the complicated, time-warped way of people who hold old grief too long and mistake it for something else. She read the letter twice and then set it down and looked out the window for a long time. Do you believe him? I asked. I believe every word of it, she said. That's not the same as forgiving it. No, I said. It isn't. But it helps, she said quietly, knowing that it was grief, not just greed. It helps more than I expected. The Henderson Project launched on a January morning that arrived cold and clear over Manhattan. The kind of day that makes the city look like it was assembled on purpose. Every line crisp, every surface lit. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hale Meridian executive floor and watched the press coverage roll across the monitors. The launch was clean. The coverage was strong. 4 months of the hardest professional work I had done since the DEA, and it was out in the world now, doing what it was built to do. Vivian came to stand beside me. She was wearing the deep green she wore when she was simply herself. Not armor, not performance, just Vivian. Her hair was half down the way it had been at the pool in Southampton on the morning this had all started. She had a coffee cup in each hand, and she held one out to me, and I took it. How are you feeling? She said. Like someone who hasn't slept properly in 4 months and should be more tired than he actually is. Why aren't you more tired? I looked at her. Because I'm standing next to the right person, I said. That does something for your energy levels. She looked at the city. Something in her face did the thing I had watched it do across months. The sequence that started with managing what she showed and ended with not managing it. Declan, she said. Yeah. I want to tell you something that isn't about Henderson or the lawsuit or any of the professional context. Tell me. She turned to look at me. The full, unguarded version of her face. The 6 a.m. pool terrace version. The midnight version. The courtroom gallery version. I have spent 7 years, she said, building something that I was proud of and afraid of in equal measure. I've been good at the company and careful about everything that wasn't the company, because the company was the one place where I knew the rules, where I knew what the evidence meant. A pause, and then you stopped following protocol and gave me your real read on Henderson, and I understood what I'd been missing. Vivian, I'm not finished. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness caused something, and we both knew it. I've been in love with you since the morning on the pool terrace when you told me the truth about my own life in a sentence that should have taken me years to get to myself. She held my gaze. I didn't say it then because I was afraid. And then everything happened, and I was more afraid. And then Sebastian put your name on that document, and I had 1 second of doubt, and that 1 second told me everything I needed to know. What did it tell you? That losing your trust would be the thing that broke me, she said. Not the company, not the lawsuit. You. I looked at this woman, who had built something extraordinary from loss, who had carried a family secret for 18 months in silence, who had sat in a federal courtroom and held herself together with the composed precision of someone who did not let the world see the structural work happening underneath, and felt the specific, irreversible weight of understanding that I was looking at someone I was not willing to lose. I stopped trusting people, I said, when trusting them cost me something I couldn't get back. And I decided I would rather be contained than broken. I set down my coffee. And then you told me you trusted me more than anyone in this company. And you called it by the right name. You said it wasn't a professional statement. And that was the moment I understood that contained wasn't actually the same as safe. No, she said. It isn't. The pool terrace, I said. That was the first time I saw you without the surface. Did you like what you saw? I saw a person who had given everything to the thing she'd built and hadn't been given a lot of that back. I looked at her steadily, and I thought someone should give it back to her. She held my gaze, those green, still, searingly attentive eyes. Then give it back, she said. I closed the distance between us. The kiss was quiet, the kind of quiet that contains enormous things. Not the dramatic collapse of two people who have been fighting their feelings, but the simple, serious meeting of two people who have both earned the moment. Her hand was at my jaw. Minejos. The city outside doing its enormous, indifferent, beautiful work of continuing. When we broke apart, she was looking at me with the expression I had no category for. The one from the pool, terrace morning, from a midnight office, from the courtroom aisle. I had a category for it now. Home. The expression people wear when they have found the place where they don't need to perform. The board is going to have opinions, she said. The board is going to have to manage those opinions. There are protocols. I've spent 2 years following every protocol, I said. I'm going to need a short break from protocols. She almost smiled. Then she fully smiled. The real version, unmanaged and complete. Declan, she said. Yeah. I'm going to need you to take a... She leaned her head against my shoulder. I put my arm around her, not tightly, not with the possession that used to live in me, where love was supposed to be. Just the weight of a man who had learned, slowly and at significant personal cost, to hold something valuable without trying to control it. Declan, she said. Yeah, I want to show you something. Now, after coffee. She was quiet for a moment. It's a document, an architectural assessment I had commissioned. A pause. On us. I looked at her. You had a forensic assessment done on us. That's not what I meant. She sat up and looked at me with an expression that was fighting a smile. I mean a structural assessment on the building. For a new project I'm considering. What project? An office, she said. A second one. Somewhere quieter. She held my gaze. Somewhere that belongs to us rather than the company. I looked at her in the June morning light. This brilliant, careful, enormously precise woman who had survived a legal war and a family secret in 23 years of someone else's unresolved grief, and was sitting at a pool with bare feet and loose hair and coffee, building the next thing. Show me the assessment, I said. She smiled. Fully, unreservedly. The pool surface moved. The Atlantic spoke somewhere past the dunes. The June morning did what mornings do, continued, without drama, into everything that came next. And the two of us, inside it, did the same.